It is remarkable that today, in the whole world, a small, simple booklet makes it easy to understand what is happening today, that clearly traces the development of society and clearly illuminates the manifestations of capitalism. The Communist Manifesto was co-authored by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels at the height of the development of industrial capitalism and the struggles to overthrow the feudal systems in Western Europe. This period was marked by the rise of the capitalist class and the struggles for the republican form of government. Karl Marx was born on the 5th of May, 1818 in Trier, Prussia, now Germany. He was a German philosopher, critic of political economy, economist, historian, and a revolutionary communist who developed Marxism and concepts such as alienation, class struggle, material conception of history, and so on. Marx's literary work and intellectual development was heavily influenced by Kant, Hegel, Feuerbach, Stirner, Smith, Rousseau, and others. The work that he developed throughout his life, remaining as the true testament of his invaluable contribution to the communist movement, influenced revolutionaries such as Lenin, Luxemburg, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, and many more who applied the scientific method Marx and Engels developed to transform their societies. Friedrich Engels was born on November 18, 1820 in Barmen, Rhine province in Prussia. Engels was a German philosopher, historian, political theorist, and revolutionary socialist. He was the closest collaborator of Marx. Together they developed the foundation for the modern communist movement. Together they co-authored the Communist Manifesto, commissioned by the Communist League. Established on June 1st, 1847 in London, the Communist League was an international political party. It was formed through the consolidation of the League of the Just, led by Karl and the Communist Correspondence Committee of Brussels, established by Marx and Engels in 1846, forming a small political circle of radical Germans located in Germany, London, and Paris. In January 1847, the League of the Just raised a discussion of organized unity with the Communist Correspondence Committee. This discussion led to Marx joining the League on the premise that a scheduled Congress would adopt a new set of principles based on the ideas expressed by Marx and Engels. Shortly after joining the League in June 1847, the London Congress took place, and the League of the Just adopted a new charter, formally changing the group's name to the Communist League. The League's program called for the overthrow of the bourgeoisie and establishment of the rule of the proletariat, and the construction of a new society, free both of private property and social classes. The League held another Congress in London in November and December 1847. Marx and Engels were in attendance and were assigned the task to compose a manifesto of the organization. This became the Communist Manifesto. In the 1840s in Europe, the terms socialism and communism were not well-defined concepts. Different thinkers of the time had a different broad idea about what these concepts really meant. All of them were trying to address the question of the material conditions produced by the boom of industrial capitalism in Europe. The common understanding of these terms by the intellectuals of the time was something beyond the present state of material life, which capital produced. The rich class was greatly alarmed and concerned with the rise of communism that had a strong association with the working class emerging at the time, which had no property and had a strong connection to the social order. Marx and Engels used the terms socialism and communism interchangeably to refer to a society beyond capitalism. The authors assumed the term communism for its particular association to the working class, who are crucial to comprehending and realizing a post-capitalist society. Workers are key to understanding what communism is and how to achieve it. In the Communist Manifesto, the authors illustrate this point sharply and clearly. The book has prefaces and 4 chapters. Chapter 1 of the book introduces the materialist conception of history, world history, as successive class struggles. It explores the relationship of the bourgeois and the proletarians. The second chapter deals with the relationship of the working class and communists. It makes it very clear that the communist revolution is a world revolution. In chapter 3, the focus is on socialist and communist literature. Marx and Engels here profoundly warn communists against a false science and its prophets masquerading as genuine communists, but are essentially reformers and opportunists who used the communist rhetoric to advance their objective material interests that are opposed to those of workers and the communist movement. The last section discusses the communist position to specific struggles that were taking place at the time and predicts a world revolution will follow soon. The history of class struggle is the history of materialist outlook, a theory that traces how human society evolves and develops. Marx asserts that the history of human society is set in motion by the conflict of material interests between different contending classes. Through using the historical materialist approach to trace the history of society, Marx establishes the fact that for societies to exist, they need to be able to produce things which are necessary for life, such as food, shelter, clothing, and so on. Without these, no society can exist. He states that the things that are used to produce other things, that is, tools, land, machinery, minerals, are the means of production. How people relate to the means of production defines their class position and their objective material interests. The capitalist who owns the land, factories, farms, have vested material interests to maximize profits by socializing labor and appropriating the surplus value created by labor power of workers. The capitalists want to continue to exploit the worker so that it can appropriate more profits for themselves, and workers want to be paid what their worth is for the time they allocate to the task of producing for the markets of the capitalists. This is an irreconcilable conflict of the material interests between these two classes. Marx states that the laws, morality, ideology, coups, wars, revolutions are all the manifestations of our society's classes and their struggles to advance their material interests. In the current social order of the interests of the capitalists and the proletarians, oppressor and oppressed have no resolution. A fight that each time ended either in the revolutionary reconstruction of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. The oppressing class struggles to hold together this status quo for as long as possible, but the struggle can only come to its conclusion with the oppressed succeeding to overthrow the oppressor by a way of a revolution and establishing a new order that advances their material interests, or both competing classes are brought to ruin somehow. Marx and Engels applied the historical materialist method in the transition from feudal society to capitalism. Feudal society, as with other class societies, has a complicated hierarchical structure of different classes. The capitalist class that develops under feudalism is from small town dwellers who amassed wealth from commerce and trade, using this wealth to generate more, independent of the feudal lords. This emerging class had a keen interest to develop navigational knowledge and the study of commerce, shipbuilding, and so on. The discovery of America and European colonial domination of the world opened up new, lucrative goods to this class, encouraging a more intense interest to develop the means of exchange, navigation, communication, and transportation. In the quest to accumulate more wealth from amassed fortune, these merchants began to take over industry itself, investing in socialized workshops and the development of the instruments of production. By doing this, they outcompeted the traditional artisans, owing to the efficiency of socialized production. As the instruments of production developed with the capitalist class, they began to command a conflict with the existing relations of production of the feudal system, which was now holding back the forces of production that had been developed by industrial capitalism. The growing bourgeoisie's need to produce cheaper commodities needed a supply of labor, which led to the disruption of the traditional peasant-lord relationship. The bourgeoisie fully utilized the forces of production to abolish the current order by way of a revolutionary reconstruction of society. The English and French revolutions were such reconstruction of society by the bourgeoisie, seizing political power from the aristocracy to abolish the feudal relations of production and set out capitalist relations of production. Marx's definition of the bourgeoisie is those who privately own and control the means of production, who employ others from the propertyless class, the working class, to work on these means of production to produce commodities for a market to make a profit. The workers labor for a wage in order to continue to live, and they produce the value that the capitalists seek to appropriate by paying the workers as little as possible to keep as much of this value for themselves alone. The workers at the same time contest this by seeking to keep as much value as it can keep to earn a higher income. It is clear that these material interests are diametrically opposed, and under capitalism, there is no resolution to this conflict. The capitalists played a revolutionary role in history by socializing production, connecting the world together in a global network of industry and consumption, and by revolutionizing the instruments of production, creating tools and machines capable of producing far beyond the necessary requirement to sustain society. Just as the forces of production of the feudal system were once hindered by the feudal relations of production, now the productive forces in capitalist society have developed to a point where they are being obstructed by the capitalist relations of production, thus holding back the potential productive power of society. Marx makes the fact that all previous classes outcompeted by capitalists and the other classes robbed of their means of subsistence have sunken into the ranks of the working class. This continually expanding class constitutes the majority in capitalist society. Having applied the historical materialist analysis we can arrive at the understanding of what communism is as the working class material interests to abolish private property ownership over the means of production, putting an end to the private appropriation of the generated surplus value into established common ownership, such that this value generated by workers is owned and controlled by the workers. Marx, in the book, puts forward a 10-point program to abolish private property and the capitalist relations of production through the expropriation of the property of capitalists by the workers will bring an end to all forms of inequality and poverty, providing work for all, food, education, and so on. Once the property of the bourgeoisie is expropriated, everyone's relations to the means of production will be equal, and thus the material interests of society will be collectively the same. This will require the working class to overthrow the ruling capitalist class with its liberal democracy. The proletariat will establish a workers' state in which the instruments of production and society's resources are put under the democratic control of the working masses, and capitalist resistance to the power of the workers is defeated. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. This is Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, 1848. Following the democratization of the economy, the full potential of the productive power of society will be unleashed, utilizing them to raise the standards of living for all. At a certain point of development, as the forces of production become so efficient and ubiquitous, human society will enter the communist stage of development, in which all in society does the work that is necessary and takes what they need to survive. From each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. This is Karl Marx in his Critique of Gotha's Program, 1875. A classless society, free from class differences, emerges, but the transition from capitalism to socialism is a necessary stage of the development to usher in communism. All workers of all countries unite.